Most people walk into a Rolex dealer thinking price is the only variable. More expensive means better watch. Less expensive means lesser watch. That framework is wrong, and it costs people money every single year. The actual hierarchy of Rolex watches is not a price ladder. It is 5 distinct levels separated by what you are really paying for at each one. The materials might change. The complications might change. But the movement accuracy, the case construction, and the superlative chronometer certification are identical from the bottom of this list to the top. Rolex applies the same finishing standard to a $5,000 watch that it applies to a $75,000 watch. What shifts between the levels is not quality. It is function, material, scarcity, and the story attached to the object. By the end of this, you will know exactly which level matches what you actually want, not what someone else thinks you should want. Level 1. The foundation. This is where Rolex begins and where most buyers should begin too. The Oyster Perpetual and the Air King live here. Retail prices start around $5,000 and top out around $7,500, depending on case size and configuration. The Oyster Perpetual is the most distilled expression of what Rolex actually is. No date window, no rotating bezel, no Cyclops magnification lens, no complication of any kind. A self-winding movement inside a waterproof oyster case on a solid bracelet. That is the entire proposition. Everything Rolex has learned about case finishing, bracelet engineering, and movement reliability across nearly a century of production is present in this watch. What is absent is everything Rolex has learned about charging more for editions. The Air King sits alongside it. Rolex created the Air King to honor Royal Air Force pilots during the Second World War, and the current version uses the same caliber 3230 movement found in watches costing twice as much. The dial is polarizing. The aviation-inspired numerals and the minutes track printed in green read as busy to some buyers and purposeful to others. What nobody argues about is the value. A current production Rolex with a modern movement, 100 meters of water resistance, and a 70-hour power reserve for under $8,000. Here is what most people miss about Level 1. These watches are available. You can walk into an authorized dealer, point at the case, and buy one. That sentence sounds unremarkable until you understand that it is functionally impossible at levels 3 and 4. The scarcity theater that defines Rolex's higher profile references does not exist here. The Oyster Perpetual is not allocated. It is not waitlisted. It does not require a purchase history or a relationship with a sales associate. It is sitting in a display case waiting for someone to recognize what it is. The best move at Level 1 is the 41mm Oyster Perpetual in one of the colored dial options that Rolex introduced several years ago. Turquoise blue, coral red, yellow, green. These dials were dismissed at launch as too casual for a serious brand. Those same dials now trade on the secondary market at premiums that would be considered aggressive for a sports reference. The people who bought them when they were available were not speculators. They were the only ones paying attention. Level 1 is not the entry point because the watches are lesser. Level 1 is the entry point because the watches are the most honest. You are paying for Rolex and receiving Rolex. Nothing more is added and nothing is inflated. Level 2. The daily icons. The Datejust. The most successful luxury wristwatch in history. First introduced in 1945, it was the first self-winding waterproof watch to display the date in a window on the dial. That combination of features defined what a modern wristwatch could be, and the design has been in continuous production for nearly 80 years. Retail prices range from $7,000 to approximately $14,000, depending on case size, bracelet selection, bezel style, and dial configuration. The range is wide because the Datejust is the most customizable watch in the Rolex catalog. Case sizes of 31, 36, and 41 millimeters, oyster or jubilee bracelet, smooth, fluted, or diamond set bezel, dozens of dial colors and textures. The permutations number in the hundreds. That customization is the strength of the Datejust, and it is also the trap. Not all configurations hold value equally. A 36mm Datejust on a Jubilee bracelet with a fluted bezel and a blue dial is a configuration that has existed for decades. It has survived every fashion cycle. It will continue to survive because it is not responding to a trend. It is the trend. A 41mm Datejust with a smooth bezel, an oyster bracelet, and a slate dial is a perfectly good watch that reads as contemporary right now and will read as dated in 7 years. The difference between those two purchases is not obvious at the point of sale. It becomes obvious at the point of resale. The rule at level 2 is restraint. The Datejust rewards buyers who choose the combinations that have existed for the longest time. Fluted bezel, Jubilee bracelet, blue, white, black, or champagne dial. These are not boring choices. These are the choices that defined the template. Everything else is a variation on a theme that already works. Here's the uncomfortable truth about level 2. The Datejust is the watch that most people should buy, and the watch that most people skip. Buyers fixate on the Submariner or the GMT because those watches carry cultural weight that the Datejust does not. The Datejust does not have a celebrity origin story. Nobody wore it to the moon or to the bottom of the ocean. It has no nickname. It does not trend on social media. It simply works, has always worked, and will continue to work for the next 80 years exactly as it has for the previous 80. That consistency is not exciting. It is valuable. And the people who understand the difference between exciting and valuable are the ones making the smartest purchases at this level. Level 3. The professional references. This is where Rolex becomes a cultural object. The Submariner, the Explorer, the GMT Master 2, the Sea Dweller, the Yacht Master. These are the watches that built the mythology, and they are the watches that most buyers are actually thinking about when they think about Rolex. Retail prices range from $8,000 to $20,000, depending on the reference, the material, and the bezel configuration. Secondary market prices add anywhere from 15% to 80%, depending on which specific reference you are discussing. Some references at this level trade below retail. Others trade at multiples. Learning which is which before you spend is not optional. Each watch at level 3 was designed to solve a specific professional problem. The Submariner was built for divers, 300 meters of water resistance, a unidirectional rotating bezel to track elapsed time underwater, luminous markers sized for readability and low visibility. The GMT Master 2 was built for pilots, a 24-hour bezel and a fourth hand that tracks a second time zone independently. The Explorer was built for mountaineers and expedition workers, maximum legibility in extreme conditions with no unnecessary complications. The Sea Dweller was built for saturation divers working at depths where a helium escape valve is not a feature but a requirement. Here is what separates a knowledgeable buyer from everyone else at level 3. The reference number matters more than the model name. A Submariner is not a Submariner. A 2010 Submariner reference 116610LN and a 2020 Submariner reference 126610LN are meaningfully different watches, different case proportions, different movement generations, different bracelet clasp systems, different secondary market trajectories. The model name gets you to the neighborhood. The reference number gets you to the correct house. The Level 3 watch that serious collectors consistently identify as the most underappreciated is the Explorer. It costs less than the Submariner. It is harder to find at authorized dealers. It carries the same movement quality and case construction, and it has one of the most legitimate origin stories in the entire Rolex catalog. Edmund Hillary and Tenzing Norgay summited Everest with Rolex prototypes that became the Explorer. That is not a marketing partnership. That is not a product placement. That is a historical event that Rolex did not orchestrate but has benefited from for 70 years. The GMT Master 2 is the most discussed watch at this level because of the nickname system. The Pepsi bezel, the Batman bezel, the Sprite bezel, the Coke bezel. Each color combination generates its own demand curve, its own secondary market premium, and its own collector community. A buyer at this level needs to understand that they are not just choosing a watch. They are choosing which corner of a naming economy they want to participate in. That naming economy has real financial consequences. The best advice at Level 3 is simple. Buy the watch you will wear the most. Not the watch that has the highest secondary market premium. Not the watch with the most discussed nickname. The watch that fits your wrist, matches your life, and will still be on your arm 3 years from now when the hype cycle is moved to a different reference. The professional references are called professional for a reason. They were designed to be used. Use them. Level 4. Precious metals. This is where the conversation changes. Every watch from levels 1 through 3 exists primarily in stainless steel. Level 4 is where gold enters. Rolex manufactures its own gold alloys in-house. Yellow gold, white gold, Ever-Rose gold, which is Rolex's proprietary rose gold alloy formulated to resist the fading that affects standard rose gold over time. They also produce watches in platinum, though platinum references occupy a separate tier within this level. Prices range from $20,000 to over $75,000 depending on the model, the metal, and the configuration. A full yellow gold Submariner, an Ever-Rose GMT Master, 2 on a Jubilee bracelet. A white gold day-date, a platinum Daytona. The spectrum is wide and the pricing is driven primarily by metal content rather than by mechanical complexity. Here is the question that Level 4 forces you to answer honestly. Are you buying the material or the message? The movement inside a gold Submariner is identical to the movement inside a steel Submariner. The timekeeping is the same, the water resistance is the same, the chronometric certification is the same. What changes is the metal surrounding that movement and the signal that metal sends. A gold Rolex communicates something specific. It has communicated that specific thing for decades. Whether that communication is relevant to your life is a personal decision that no one else can make for you. The two-tone watches, what Rolex calls roll-sore, deserve specific attention. A roll-sore Datejust, or GMT, combines a steel case with gold elements on the bezel, crown, and center bracelet links. The value proposition is real gold at a lower price point than full gold. The aesthetic proposition is divisive. Two-tone peaked as a cultural moment in the 1980s, spent 2 decades being dismissed as dated, and has been quietly strengthening in collector circles for the last several years. Taste cycles. What is currently unfashionable becomes desirable approximately 15 years after it stops being fashionable. Two-tone is currently in the upswing of that cycle. The day-date lives exclusively at this level and above. It is the only Rolex that has never been produced in stainless steel. Every day-date ever made is gold or platinum. It was introduced in 1956 as the first wristwatch to display both the day and the date in windows on the dial. The day is spelled out fully at 12 o'clock. The bracelet designed for this watch is formally called the President Bracelet. The association with American presidents, most notably Lyndon Johnson, earned the watch its cultural position. The platinum day-date with the ice blue dial is one of the most recognizable luxury watches on Earth. The color of that dial exists on no other Rolex model. Ice blue is reserved exclusively for platinum. If you see that dial color from across a room, you know the case is platinum. You know the price. You know the tier. The dial functions as a signal that does not require the viewer to inspect the watch closely. That is not an accident. That is design serving a social function rather than a professional one. The uncomfortable truth at level 4 is that gold Rolex watches hold value well, but they do not appreciate the way steel sports references do. A steel Daytona has historically outperformed a gold Daytona on the secondary market. A steel Submariner has outperformed a gold Submariner. The metal that costs more to produce generates lower returns as a collectible. This seems counterintuitive until you understand that scarcity, not material cost, drives secondary market pricing. Rolex produces fewer steel professional references relative to demand than it produces gold references. The cheaper input creates the more valuable output because the waiting list is longer. If you are buying at level 4 because you love gold and you intend to wear the watch, it is an excellent purchase. If you are buying at level 4 because you assume more expensive means better investment, the data does not support you. Level 5, vintage, collector grade, and beyond. The rules change completely. At level 5, you are no longer buying a watch that Rolex currently produces. You are buying a watch that Rolex produced years or decades ago. And the value of that watch is determined by variables that have nothing to do with the object's original purpose. Prices start around $15,000 for entry-level vintage sport references and extend past $20 million for the rarest documented examples. The Paul Newman Daytona, the Double Red Sea Dweller, the James Bond Submariner, the Padalone. These are not watches in the commercial sense. They are artifacts that happen to tell time. At level 5, condition is currency. An unpolished case is worth more than a polished case because polishing removes original material. Original hands are worth more than replacement hands even if the replacements are genuine Rolex service parts. An original bracelet with stretch and wear is worth more than a new old stock bracelet that was never fitted to the watch. The logic inverts. At every other level, newer and cleaner means more valuable. At level 5, original and aged means more valuable. Wear is not damage. Wear is provenance. Documentation drives pricing more than condition in many cases. A complete set, meaning the watch, the original box, the original papers, the original warranty card, and ideally the original receipt, trades at a significant premium over the same reference without paperwork. The documents prove the watch's history. They establish an unbroken chain of custody. They reduce the risk that the dial, hands, bezel, or case have been replaced or modified. In a market where the difference between a correct dial and an incorrect dial can be $100,000, paper is not a courtesy. Paper is insurance. Here is what most people do not understand about level 5. The watches that cost the most are often the ones that function the least as watches. A reference 6239. Paul Newman Daytona with a correct exotic dial and original bracelet is too valuable to wear to dinner. The insurance alone prohibits casual use. The risk of a scratch, a bump, or a stolen from wrist event makes daily wear financially irrational. The watch exists in a vault or a safe deposit box. It comes out for photographs, for authentication sessions, and occasionally for auction previews. It tells time perfectly. Nobody checks it for the time. At this level, the Paul Newman is the defining reference. Vintage Daytonas with exotic dials that Rolex originally called exotic dials and that nobody wanted when they were current. Italian auctioneers in the 1980s started calling them Paul Newmans after the actor was photographed wearing one. His wife, Joanne Woodward, had given him a reference 6239, engraved with the words, "Drive carefully, me." That specific watch sold at Phillips in 2017 for $17.8 million. It originally cost approximately $210. That is a return of roughly 84,000 times the purchase price. And none of it is explained by the movement, the materials, or the complications. It is explained entirely by the name, the provenance, and the inscription. Level 5 is where the watch market becomes the art market. Emotional attachment, historical narrative, rarity measured in single digits, auction results that are determined as much by who is in the room as by what is on the block. If you are entering this level, you need an advisor, an authenticator, and a very clear understanding of why you are here. Curiosity is the right reason. Ego is the expensive reason. Investment can work, but only if your knowledge of references, dial variations, and provenance markers is deep enough to compete with dealers who have been doing this for 30 years. The education is the investment. Everything else is just the object. So, where does that leave you? Level 1 is where clarity lives. You are paying for the watch and nothing else. Level 2 is where practicality lives. The Datejust does everything and asks for nothing. Level 3 is where passion enters. The professional references are the watches that made Rolex what it is. Level 4 is where the material changes the message. Level 5 is where the rules invert and the watch becomes something else entirely. The sweet spot for the person who actually plans to wear their Rolex sits between levels 2 and 3. $7,000 to $15,000. A Datejust that will last generations. An explorer that carries a legitimate history. A submariner that solves a problem so completely that the solution became iconic. These are not consolation prizes. These are the watches that built the brand. Everything above that line is a different conversation. It might be the right conversation for you. It might not. But the decision should be made with open eyes, not with the assumption that spending more automatically means getting more. At Rolex, the movement is the movement. The case is the case. The certification is the certification. What changes between a $5,000 Oyster Perpetual and a $75,000 day date is not the quality of the watchmaking. It is the story, the material, and the signal. Know which one you are buying. That knowledge is worth more than any reference in the catalog. The best Rolex is not the most expensive one. It is not the one with the longest wait list. It is not the one with the most famous nickname or the highest secondary market premium. The best Rolex is the one that sits on your wrist every day and does what it was built to do. Everything else is a number on a spreadsheet or a story someone tells at a dinner you were not invited to. Buy the watch you will wear. That has always been the answer. The industry just makes it very expensive to figure that out on your own.